Hello and welcome to another session of Karen's Colours. I'm Dr. Karen and these are my colour conversations. It's that time of month again where I do the colour analysis readings for every birthday month of the year, and this time we'll be looking at what will happen in the month of May 2025. I've been asked why I don't do zodiac signs for these readings, and there's a very specific reason for that. The month of our birth is the one that occurs on all official documents about our lives, and as such, it has a subliminal effect upon us. So the birth month is actually more important on a subliminal level than our zodiac signs. We all have birth months. We don't necessarily follow zodiacs. Similarly, colour is also something that works on a subliminal level. We all can see colours, we can all recognise them, and as such, they have an effect upon our lives that works at an unconscious level. So by pairing the subliminal text of our birth month with the unconscious language of colour, I hope to bring something a little different to you in terms of a colour reading that analyses what could be and what might be. This is a general reading, of course, and if it doesn't resonate with you immediately, maybe you'd like to come back to it later. But for now, just settle back and enjoy. Here we have a colour reading for people born in July for the month of May. The colours, as usual, have been pre-shuffled, so let's see what it has in store for you. The energy that you bring into the month is red on yellow. The energy in the middle of the month is purple on blue. And the energy with which you leave the month is white on brown. And the underlying energy for this month is blue on white. Let's look at this. There are two colours that are repeated here. We have blue in the general energy for the entire month, which is in the bottom of the pair. And that means it has to do with the need, the drive, the motivation that causes an action in the real world. That same blue is repeated again, only this time it is in the action section and it's part of the underlying energy for the month. We also have a repeat of white. White appears towards the end of the month in the action section, and it appears in the underlying energy as the need or drive or motivation. So how does that relate to what's going on with you? Well, you're going to enter the month with a period of trepidation. Yellow in the internal world, yellow as the drive, is often a signifier of wanting to overcome some sort of fear, some sort of anxiety. It's a need for happiness. It's a need for joy. It's a need for elevating your mood. But because it's in the bottom section, it means that the mood is not yet elevated. So what do you do when you have a low mood? Well, in the real world, what you're doing here is to activate yourself, to get busy in every single direction. It's also because red in the real world is often a harbinger of some sort of danger, a warning to you not to do too much, too quickly, too fast, or without enough due forethought. Yellow internally is a requirement for thinking about what you are doing. In the real world, there is no yellow at all. It's only red, and red is the actual action that you take. Now, if we put those two colours together, if we mix them, red and yellow, of course, form orange, and orange is courage. It's the ability to stand up, be counted, be socially visible, and at the same time to survive all sorts of crises. Well, the crisis comes from the red in the real world. You need to be careful at the beginning of the month that you don't actually injure yourself, because that's always a possibility. As we move further into the month, we have purple over blue. Blue as a need internally is a need for quiet, for peace, for comfort, for understanding, for just letting things be. A need for the status quo to exist. But in the real world, what is happening instead is that there are massive changes taking place. Purple is always about destruction and creation. So whatever it is that is being destroyed in the real world is also an act of creation. You're making something new. Purple on blue, in terms of the tarot, refers to the King of Cups. Now, the King of Cups, apart from being a king and so therefore fairly powerful, and that's what the purple is all about, rules so that things remain calm, so emotionally under control. That is what the blue is about. Yet the King of Cups is also ambivalent because there is this constant need for control of emotions. And in the real world, there have to be some fairly strict rules that are applied to those people around, as well as to himself, in order to maintain that peace and quiet and stability that is required internally. I call this ambivalence because there is a difference between the ability to maintain that peace and quiet and the ability to create destruction and to be creative in making something new happen. So together, these two, when we mix blue and purple together, we get a very, very dark purple. That's about as close to black as you're likely to get. Now, black, as we know, is all about withdrawal. It's about keeping your distance from things. It's also about getting in touch with your own inner spirit. So this is a very spiritual card. It is all about being able to contact spirit in the real world by keeping calm in the internal world, maintaining the status quo and creating whatever change is necessary for you to feel good about what it is that you are doing. By the time we get to the end of the month, things have changed quite dramatically. Instead of a lot of hues, as we have here in what is coming into the month and also what's happening through the major part of the month, now we have in the real world a great deal of emptiness. Now, white in the real world as an action means energy is scattered in all directions. There is no specific aim, no specific result of the things that you're doing. And what is causing that? Well, if we look at the brown underneath here, brown in the internal world, what we have here is a lot of hopes and dreams. It's the wish and pray and hope and dream and thinking, praying type of card. That's the color of what you want. It's what is also lacking. So making schemes, making plans, setting goals is all a need, but in the real world, what goals are you going to set? Which direction are you planning to go in? White doesn't give you a direction. It doesn't give you any guidelines. And so the ideas that you are creating for yourself, the things that you feel you need, the plans that you're making, often come to very little. White on brown in the tarot is the Nine of Pentacles. It's a self-made person, but it's also independent, and it's also a lack of permanence. There is nothing about these dreams and hopes and aspirations that you have internally that stays around for any length of time, because the white constantly allows that energy to be dissipated outwards. So how is that influenced by the underlying energy that we have here, blue over white? When the white is in the external world, it causes energy to flow outwards. But when it's in the internal world, it means that there is a need for that clarity to occur. We're looking for energy to flow inwards. But what is flowing inwards is pretty well nothing, because there we have a continuation of that white. When that need for inward flowing energy is a desire, then what happens in the response to this, for this particular combination, is blue. Blue is stability. It is the status quo. It is everything in its place. It's also working to maintain that status quo. So even though there is a great need for energy, there really isn't a lot of energy available. And what is being expended is all energy that is directed towards keeping things the way they always should be. So, how does this energy of the underlying abilities affect what is going on during the month? If we take the white need, that is need for energy, and we attach it to the yellow here, which is that anxiety, then we're actually exacerbating that anxiety. The white, this need for knowledge, the curiosity that goes with whiteness, and the yellow, the lack of happiness, in other words, the likelihood of some form of anxiety or stress, becomes worse as the month begins. What's more, the blue and red interact with one another to create purple, which is, of course, the color of creation and destruction. So while the stress increases, so too does the change that you are attracting towards yourself. In the real world, you're having to make a lot of changes. You're having to take control and also give up control. Taking control is red, giving it up is blue. Between the two of them, things change. Some things are destroyed and damaged, other things are created, and new things arise. Those experiences are such that they should, in fact, that's what you're aiming for anyway, reduce the amount of stress and the amount of emptiness that is felt. But are they really successful? We really don't know unless we know what it is that you are, in fact, changing. When we look at what's happening in the middle of the month, white and blue together form a very pale blue, which is very akin to the color cyan that we have up here. Now, cyan is absolute bliss. It's absolute quiet and comfort and stagnation as well. But this is a need. You need comfort. You need to be able to settle back and relax and just let things be. But by the middle of the month, that becomes an overwhelming need because in the real world, you have blue and violet together, once again, creating that system of getting inside yourself, staying inside your head, having conversations with yourself, developing that spiritual connection that is created by the purple and the blue when they are mixed together. So in fact, the energy of the middle of the month, which is exactly that same energy, the energy of wanting things to remain the same, but in the real world they are changing, that ambivalence that occurs when you have the power to maintain peace, but it is in constant flux, is made a lot more difficult by the underlying energy. The white causes the amount of peace that you're looking for to become amplified, and the blue, that is the duty that you carry out, the organization that you have around yourself, when mixed with the purple of the power that is inherent in the color of what you're doing in the real world, then it causes you to retreat inside your head even further. So the middle of May for you is going to be a situation of where you're really going to have to do a lot of very heavy thinking, a lot of circumspection. By the end of the month, things have changed again. We have white and brown becoming the colors of what is your motivation. When we lighten brown up, it becomes less of a need to get out there and learn the skills that are necessary to overcome the luck that you have in order to obtain your goals and so forth. But the white actually causes those goals to become, shall we say, wishy-washy. You are less inclined to be very specific about your goals. You're more inclined to be in the wishing and hoping section rather than the thinking and planning and scheming section. You are not quite as easily able to decide exactly what it is that you want, because once again, we have here a need for clarity, a need for energy, and here we have a need for somewhere to put that energy. Put the two together and the energy doesn't seem to be going very far, very fast. And just as we had here a need for peace and quiet and stability to the nth degree, here that same combination appears, but this time it is in the real world. In order to overcome this lack of inspiration, which is basically what wishing and hoping is all about, you find yourself instead creating the sort of peace and calm that comes with cyan. You're finding yourself in a state of almost paralysis. You don't know what you want, but things aren't really upsetting you either. You could be in a state of bliss. It could be a really lovely time, but at the same time, nothing much is changing because cyan or pale blue, this mixture here, is all about things remaining exactly as they are, no movement in any direction. So it doesn't matter how much you want to scheme and plan and how many goals you set, they will be going nowhere fast. So how do we overcome this? Well, we need to look at the colours that are missing. There is no black, but you do have white. There is red. There is yellow. There's no green, but you do have blue. You have brown, but no orange. Even though orange exists as a hidden colour here, it doesn't exist on its own. There is no grey. You do, however, have purple. And there is no pink. And although cyan is hidden here, and here, and here, it doesn't exist as a colour on its own. So what we have here, white, red, blue, purple, brown, and yellow, are the colours of the skills and attributes that will lead you through the month of May. These are the things that you can do and have had practice at and are doing quite well. What you're not doing, what you're not looking at, is black, green, orange, cyan, pink, and grey. These colours are the skills that you are avoiding for whatever reason. They may not be available to you immediately. They may also be skills that you're not particularly fond of using. But all the same, these are the skills that are the key to preventing you from having this stalemate condition about the things that you're aiming for in life. So choose the one colour that is most appealing out of those six, and then the colour that is least appealing of those six, and put them together, enter them into your life in some way, use them on a daily basis as a visual prompt, and you'll find that they will influence the way in which you travel through the month of May. And when you get to the end, there will be something in here that triggers off a different direction to the one that you normally would end up in. Maybe it just simply reduces the energy or gives you opportunities or simply allows you to make that final connection with spirit that you're looking for here. This is now a colour reading for people born in the month of August for the month of May 2025. What's going to happen to you there? Let's have a look at it, shall we? The cards, of course, have been pre-shuffled. So now, what have we got? The energy entering into the month of May is blue on blue. The energy that permeates the most part of May is brown on brown. And the energy that you leave May with is black on grey. And the underlying energy is black on black. Now, this is a very interesting reading. There are three cards here that have the same colour top and bottom. That is what you hope for, what you're aiming for, what you lack is mirrored in what you actually do. That's highly unusual. What is more unusual is that there are only 12 of these cards in the pack of 84 cards. To get one of them is rare enough. To get two is extremely rare. to get 3 is virtually unheard of. And when we look at this 4th card, the future, we have black and grey, which is also extremely similar to the black on black. So this entire reading is a warning. The same colour top and bottom restricts what you can accomplish. It restricts your accomplishments and your actions to the drive that comes from underneath. It is a solitary endeavour. What you want and what you do are exactly the same thing. It doesn't allow you any scope. You've got a little bit of scope here because the colours are different, but basically what you want and what you get in these 3 colours, these 3 cards, is exactly the same in terms of goals and activities. It's not a very comfortable place to be, but let's examine them in detail. What you bring into the month of May is blue on blue. Blue on blue in terms of the tarot is the High Priestess. It's the keeping of secrets. It's maintaining silence in the face of inquisitiveness, particularly from other people. Blue as the interior, as the need or drive, is a desire for stability. It's a desire for maintaining the status quo, for allowing things to be the way that they always have been and should be so into the future. Blue in the real world, blue as an action, is shut up, do as you're told, get on with the job, don't complain. It's that sort of energy that maintains silence. And so maintaining silence about things that need to remain stable is, of course, the keeping of secrets, which is exactly what the High Priestess is about. It's a very powerful energy. It's an energy also of complete and utter mothering. It's the perfect mother in the extent that it permits that energy to nurture everything and anything, regardless of what it is and regardless of what its needs are. When we move on to this card, we have brown over brown. And this, once again, is a card that appears, or this is a color combination that appears in the tarot. Only this time, it's the Knight of Pentacles. The Knight of Pentacles is the slowest moving knight. It's the person who is moving towards a goal. And indeed, that's exactly what we have here. The brown in the internal world is all about setting goals. It's all about the need to have a plan, the need to determine where you want to head, where you are now, acknowledging that, and then moving in that direction. In the real world, those goals, those plans, those practical skills that are necessary to carry out those plans are put into action, is able to plod their way through life, heading towards a particular direction. Now, what is interesting about this and this card here, the blue and then the brown cards, is that they are both cards of work. This is work to maintain the status quo, to create stability, to maintain silence. This is hard work geared towards learning skills, putting them into effect, and heading in a specific direction. But it's also a card of slowness. There is no rapid movement here. There is also, while this is all about secrets, this is also, in a way, a secretive card, because we don't really know exactly where the end result will find us when we are working our way through this Knight of Pentacles energy that takes us from a need, a drive, a desire, through to how do we obtain that by working to maintain the peace, working to attain a goal. By the end of the month, those work-oriented issues have disappeared. And instead, you find yourself in a situation that is grey internally. When we have grey internally, there is a need, a seeking for something that explains what would otherwise be seen as confusion and uncertainty. Life doesn't feel very certain. What you have planned here, what you have done here to maintain your plans, to plod along, to keep yourself to yourself, to just get on with the job that you were doing without any form of interaction with others, that has now become less confident for you. You don't know exactly where you're headed. You are uncertain. You're a little confused. And in the real world, you've had to take time out, or you have decided to remove yourself from the sorts of activities that involved others, because this certainly involves others. It involves others because you have to learn from somebody what you need to do for those skills. And this involves others as well, because you are keeping secrets, not necessarily your own. It could be other people's secrets. And so you're working in the background to prevent those from getting out. So here is a withdrawal in the real world. You're moving into a state of inner life, inner conversations. You're learning to speak with yourself. You are removing yourself actively from any sort of interaction with others so that you have time to get to grips with what's going on inside. Black is the color of ultimate spirituality in this color analysis. Here we have you wanting to get in touch with whatever there is inside that needs to be contacted in order for you to develop both greater understanding, which is inherent here, but also the skills and abilities necessary for you to progress further. The underlying energy here, though, is one of great removal of yourself from everything. Inside, when black occurs internally, it means that spirit is not easily contacted. You need to do it. You need to be able to have that time out. You need to have those internal conversations, but they're not there easily obtainable. In the real world, you're probably doing a fair amount of meditation, a fair amount of introspection, getting to know yourself, getting to know just where you are coming from and what meaning there is in life for the various things that you have experienced. In its most negative form, black on black is depression. In its most positive form, it is a form of contact with your own psychic abilities. And for that, it's a very powerful mechanism. When we look at how that influences what's going on in your month, the black and blue, as the idiom would have it, means that you come out feeling, or you start the month feeling fairly battered and bruised. They don't have to be physical batterings or physical bruisings. They can be psychological or spiritual. But certainly this need to maintain the status quo while at the same time trying to understand your own psychic connections makes for a very difficult time. The blue allows you to understand where others are coming from, to understand how things fit in the real world, but the black prevents you from being able to disseminate that information. Black and brown, when they are put together, have a similar sort of problem. Once again, we have this total withdrawal, this total shutting down of yourself away from others. There's no social interaction here at all. Whereas here, with the brown, that social interaction is mandatory. If you're going to learn a new skill, you need to learn it from someone else. You can't just invent it. There's no invention here in brown on brown. The Knight of Pentacles doesn't invent the journey. He simply travels along it. But when we have black and brown together, we end up with a problem in that what your spirit is heading you towards is something that is hidden from you. And the various different skills that you are learning are things that may not necessarily give you any further insight or further information that will allow you to understand and deal with those very deep urges that come as a result of all that introspection. As well as this, as we move into the future, we find that the black energy internally and the grey energy internally here create a color that is almost black in itself. So we almost have a repetition of this overarching energy or the underlying energy and the future as it is coming. There is a need for overcoming confusion, which comes as a result of the things that you need to learn. And in the real world, the double black causes an even further retreat. You can't stop yourself retreating from the issues that you're facing. You can't stop yourself from going into your own head and spending a lot of time there. Altogether, this is a rather powerful reading, but it's also one that is full of caution. The High Priestess doesn't allow things to easily bypass her. She knows what's going on. It's a very feminine energy. The Knight of Pentacles also doesn't allow others to know what's going on. It's a masculine energy. These two, lots of energy, are asexual. There is nothing in either of them that lets you know which is going to come out on top, feminine energy or masculine energy. You're simply in that dark space where you have to figure out what's going on inside yourself by spending time in your head. So how do we cope with all of this? Well, let's examine the colors that are missing. You have black, but there's no white. There's no red or yellow or green. You do, however, have blue and brown. There's no orange, but there is grey. There's no purple or pink or cyan. So when we look at this color palette here, black, blue, grey, and brown, it looks as though the month of May for you is going to be a fairly dull one. It's full of hard work. It's full of having to spend time rethinking exactly what your aims are in life, and also not giving away too much information about how you're about to attempt to get those aims. There's a fair of underlying confusion that comes up as a result of this, but all in all, these colours are dark. Contrast that then with the colours over here. These are the skills that you're not currently using. These are the skills that you do not have in your repertoire as yet. White, green, red, orange, purple, yellow, pink, and cyan. All of the brighter colours, the more outgoing colours, the more outgoing skills, the ones that are necessary for you to be able to travel through society pretty much in a state of interacting with others, are missing. These are all introspective colours. Here we have the colours that will enable you to deal with others, and you're not using them. In order to overcome some of the problems that are likely to arise here in this month, I suggest very strongly that you take the one colour that is most appealing here and the colour that is least appealing, put them together and use them every single day throughout May, because eventually you don't want to end up in a state of confusion and depression. You want to end up in a state of partial enlightenment, because you now have a complete link to your psychic self. And you will get that when you incorporate the skills that you're not currently using. If you choose not to do this, then I urge you very carefully to consider what it is that you believe and understand in terms of how to keep things under control, to be extremely circumspect about the sorts of goals that you set yourself and the way in which you learn how to achieve them, and also to deal with confusion in a way that doesn't present to you a collapse of your psyche. It's important. Please do it. This is a colour reading for people born in the month of September for May 2025. Let's see what May has in store for you. The cards, as usual, have been pre-shuffled. So let's have a look. The energy you bring into the month is brown on grey. The energy in the middle of the month is red on grey. The energy with which you leave the month is purple on blue. And the underlying energy for all of this is red on brown. Now, when we examine this, we can see that there are three colours that are repeated. Firstly, we have grey in the internal world, the need, the drive, the motivation. It appears both in the energy that you bring into the month, but also in the energy that permeates the majority of the month. We have brown, which in the energy brought into the month is the actions that you undertake. But also it appears as an underlying energy here as a need, a drive, a motivation. And then we have red. Here in the majority of the month, it is the color and the skill that you are actually doing. And that is repeated here as the underlying energy. So what does all of this mean? Looking firstly at the energy that you're bringing into the month, we have here grey in the internal world. There is a need here for some sort of understanding, for clarification, for things to be made less confusing. Grey is the colour of uncertainty, but when it is a need, it's not a need for uncertainty, it is a need for overcoming that uncertainty. And the way in which you do this at the start of the month is to get out there and begin to work on some of the goals, some of the aspirations that you have had throughout the previous month of April. You here are learning skills, maybe they're new skills. These are skills that are necessary for you to achieve some aims. But the thing is, right now, as you're entering into the month, those skills are not necessarily clarifying what it is that you don't understand. So the new skills are somewhat confusing, and there is a need, a drive here to overcome that confusion by being a lot more careful about how you actually learn those skills and your determination to decide just which skills are important for you to achieve the aims that you are going for. In the center of the month, in the main part of the month, that same confusion reigns still in your internal life. You haven't yet been able to subject that confusion, that uncertainty to any sort of analysis. Whereas back here at the start of the month, you're learning new skills. Now, of course, you have taken charge of your life and the outcomes that you're going to get as a result of the plans that you made back here. Red in the real world, however, is always a bit of a warning. And it's a warning because red is often decisions made on the spur of the moment, actions undertaken without thinking beforehand, and so therefore they have the possibility inherent within them of danger. Don't allow yourself to be too feisty when it comes to the things that you are determined to carry out as a result of this need to overcome the uncertainties with which you are faced. By the time we head into the future area, we find that that color system has completely changed. Instead of confusion and uncertainty and the need to overcome these, now we have the need for things to settle down, to become stable. Maybe you've done something here that has caused a disruption. Red often does disrupt things, and it disrupts them violently because you haven't thought through the consequences. Grey often has to do with looking for the consequences before action, but this is action that has occurred before the consequences have been thoroughly investigated. So if that is the case, then by the end of the month, you're going to find yourself really wanting to settle back and just let whatever drama occurred fly past, just leave you behind. In the real world, however, there is also a need for some sort of healing. You need to take control, not in the way that you did here by actually bombastic demands. Here, it is the power to be able to take control of whatever controversies you're dealing with, and in the process of using that control to begin to create peace. In terms of the tarot, purple and blue is the King of Cups. The King of Cups is an ambivalent character. This is a person who desires peace and quiet and the status quo to simply continue without much input. But in the real world, there are constant challenges, constant changes happening. Purple is the color of both destruction and creation. So things that are challenging are met and then repurposed into something different. But that creates ambivalence because the power that is necessary to be expended in order to maintain the status quo, to maintain stability in life, is such that it can very easily be tipped over to becoming autocracy, which is what this red is about. And you've already had a go at that, and it hasn't necessarily worked out well for you. So here we need to be able to settle back, choose your battles wisely, and then work towards establishing some sort of contentment as a result of the changes that need to be made. In terms of color, blue and purple together become a very dark purple, which is as close to black as we can get with the hues. Black is the color of introspection. It's the color of your own spiritual self. It's your psychic self. It's getting in touch with your inner self. This purple and blue combination is a challenge to do exactly that, to take time to get to have conversations with your inner self, to get to understand the motivations that lie deep within yourself. So how does the underlying energy here fit with this particular story? Here we have as the underlying energy a need for some sort of goal, some sort of end result. Brown in the internal world is the wish and hope and think and pray and planning and scheming color. And because it is a need, a drive, a motivation, you have a lot of ideas, a lot of things that you want to accomplish. In the real world, however, every time you try and accomplish those, one of the things that happens is that you overstep the mark. You have a tendency towards wanting to demand that things work out for you without necessarily thinking carefully about how you go about obtaining your goals without necessarily creating havoc in life. How does this influence what's going on back here? As you enter into the month of May, the brown and grey together tend to reduce the numbers of ideas that you find buzzing around in your head. There is a lack of creativity, a reduction in the sorts of ideas and wishes that you want to aim for. Your ability to set goals is reduced. And because of that reduction, you're finding yourself even more inclined to want to get those goals working. But they're not doing so very effectively. In the real world, you have red and brown, which is in fact your underlying energy, but now it's all in action. You're acting on the things that you have learnt to do. You're working towards your goals. You find yourself with particular things that you want to accomplish and working hard towards them. But again, as I've said before, red is a warning. Don't overdo it. Don't try to do too many things at once, because when you do that, you can in fact harm yourself. We have the same goal reduction or goal confusion that has influenced the beginning of the month continues on into the middle of the month. You still have goals and dreams and aspirations that you need to put into the real world. But here, once again, there is confusion and uncertainty about how you can go about not just selecting them, but also carrying them out. In the real world, we have a double dose of red. That is definitely a warning sign. Please be extremely careful that you don't spill blood, because if you're going to, chances are it will be your own. Don't allow your temper to get away with you. Once again, red has to do with tantrums as well. And when you have a double dose of that, it means that you are trying desperately to be the person who is the boss. And you don't actually have the understanding that is necessary or the skills that are necessary for you to be able to take that role. Be extremely careful. That's all I can say. In terms of how this underlying energy affects your future, brown and blue together are colors that are associated with work, both of them. The blue work, the need for stability, is work towards maintaining the status quo. The need for goals and dreams is the need to establish just what work needs to be done in order to obtain those goals. So here we have a drive within both of these colors combinations that require you to organize yourself, to create some form of plan to get yourself moving in a specific direction. In the real world, we have red and purple. Red, when linked with purple, is an increase in the power that exists to get this planning and scheming and placating of people to get your ideas made into reality. The red and purple encourages an increase in the ability to maintain that, to create that. Purple is creativity, it's also destruction. Red is autocracy, it's also passion and action. When we put the two together, there is a risk that you may just find yourself being a little bit too arrogant. You may find yourself not being able to recognize that other people have to contribute their selves to the status quo, that other people need to be able to be available to teach you the things that you need to know in order to achieve your own goals, that there is a human contact here that you are missing when you have got too much red and too much purple within your active life. You may be able to take charge in a way that enables you to do some healing, because purple is also about making things better. But because red appears twice in the same reading, it is always a warning. It says stop and wait. And that's probably good advice. So how do you help yourself along this journey? Let's look at the colors that are missing. There is no black or white. You have red. There's no yellow or green, but you do have blue. You have brown. There's no orange, but you do have gray and purple. There's no pink, and there is no cyan. So the colors here, the red, blue, gray, purple, and brown, are the skills and attributes that you are using in the month of May to travel from a state of confusion about what you need to know in order to obtain a goal through to the ability to create peace and quiet and harmony through your abilities to make things better for yourself and for others. What is missing here The cyan, yellow, pink, orange, white, black, and green are all the skills that you're currently not using. And these are the skills that are important in terms of alternative methods of traveling through here without necessarily letting this red overrun your life, getting yourself out of the potential danger that is hidden in here. So I suggest to you that you take the one color out of these that is most appealing, and then the color that is least appealing, and include those into your life in some way over the next month. And when you do so, you will find that your journey from this instability through to being in charge of your own peace and harmony will become easier. But the choice is yours, because this tends to suggest that you're far more likely to rely on your own opinions in the spur of the moment rather than to take advice. I'm offering it anyway. It's up to you to choose to take it. And there we have it. Another set of readings that will follow you and your birth month through the month of May. I certainly hope that you found something in these readings that is of benefit to you, and perhaps it might make you think a little bit more deeply as to how we can tell things about our futures without necessarily being aware of what the specifics are in each case. Certainly, for the rest of May, I hope that you have a wonderful time, that the colours in your life bring you many blessings. Until next time, bye.